Good evening, one and all. Gordon Causey coming to you live and unscripted as always. And as always, here is Candy the Wonder Pup, who has had an amazing day. And she's not getting a you know what. No, not tonight. No, no. You can get some love. But Candy had an incredible day. We all had an incredible day. We had a picnic at a provincial park nearby. Went swimming, hiking. Good day. A little worn out. Okay, go lay down. Go lay down. That's good girl. Good girl. Anyway, uh, she's learned to accept that she's not going to get one every single time. Apologize for the distraction. Normally, I start out giving her, what I give her. It's now 11:55 p.m. on the first day of August, 2024, and I was sent an email by one of my oldest subscribers to this channel, an individual named Sharunian Allegiance, asking me to comment on a news event that I wasn't even familiar with. Many will be familiar in all likelihood, called the Bali-9, Bali referencing Bali, Indonesia, and about a news story that broke all the way back around 2005 when 9 Australian individuals, the Bali-9, were roped into being mules in the drug trade. They strapped multiple kilograms of heroin to their persons and were in Bali, Indonesia, and they were ratted out and were all imprisoned. 2 were subsequently executed, and it's a bit of a horrific tale. Basically, we're talking about young kids, 20, late teens, early 20s, young adults who did something incredibly stupid, obviously, and got caught. And 2 have paid the ultimate price. A number of them have been imprisoned for life. And probably what brought this to Sharunian's consciousness, what brought it to mind, was the fact that one individual has just been released. One individual, after serving 20-ish years, was finally released. I'm going to share the news story about the individual who I'm not going to share the news story. It's linked down below. I didn't. I closed that tab, and I don't want to reopen it. But it's linked down below. You can read about it. It was a woman who was said to have been granted clemency, was granted release from what should have been a life imprisonment, and but because of her cooperation with government officials in terms of, I think she may have notified officials about everyone who was involved in this mule operation. Mule, that's the term they use for people who transport drugs, carry them on their body. Sharunian writes, in Canada, they would probably not even face jail time, most likely a fine and probation if they're first-time offenders. In all likelihood, I imagine that would be like in British Columbia, in particular, on our west coast. We have what are so-called safe injection sites, and I'm not fully up on it. I don't live in British Columbia. We're talking about full-on decriminalization, certainly of even the harshest drugs, cocaine, heroin, and the like. And if you're not familiar with Indonesia, it's the largest Muslim country by population in the world. I have my globe here. Let's see if I can get it to render on the screen. Yeah, Indonesia is in this area. It's an archipelago. North, I guess, northwest. I'm going the wrong way. Everything's backwards on screen versus the way I think it's going to be. It's this area. I keep going the wrong way. I can't get my finger on it. And this stupid, the axis thing is in the way. So it's in around Malaysia. It's in this area here, north of Australia. And so Australians, it's a popular tourist destination. And there was an article that I did find in CBC that was back in, when was this published? Back in 2015, when there was the execution of 8 people in total, including 2 members of the Bali-9. And if you watch the video down below, it is quite heart-wrenching. It is a gut punch, because the 2 individuals who were executed actually did what we propose are, prisons are supposed to be correctional institutions. And that's how it's framed in Canada, is the idea of corrections and rehabilitation, and to help individuals who've gone the wrong way to really rehabilitate themselves and to eventually be reintroduced into general society as functioning members. And if you look at the video that Sharunian shared with me, and I have since, I'm sharing it down below, it's about an hour long. You can play it at double time speed and cut it to half an hour or so. But teaching computer programming, teaching English to students. One became a pastor, and created artwork for exhibitions, and tried to do something positive with their life in prison. It was quite eye-opening. I would have thought that a prison in Indonesia, that it would be something like a gulag type environment, but they planted grass and trees, and they engaged in gardening, and it seemed like a somewhat positive environment. But then ultimately, and it seemed to be a reasonably decent vehicle for rehabilitating people. But then ultimately, even though when individuals are rehabilitated, these 2 were still killed. And as far as I'm aware, there are Australians, there's members of this Bali-9. 2 were executed. 1 died of kidney failure or cancer or something. So that's 3. So there are 6 still sentenced to life imprisonment with no chance for parole. And how do you approach a topic like this? There are numerous ways. You can talk about the death penalty, for one, and the death penalty is certainly a contentious issue. Canada does not have the death penalty, and there are many Canadians who would like to see a reintroduction of the death penalty. I have my issues with it, just my own personal opinions on the death penalty. I do have some issues with it. The biggest one being that mistakes can happen. Individuals can be wrongly convicted. There's a famous case of David Milgaard, someone who was convicted of the rape and murder of a young woman, and then was later, through DNA testing, exonerated of his crime. Had the death penalty been imposed on him, there's no going back. Sharunian writes, a life sentence is a death sentence. I would disagree. I don't think I can understand that point of view, viewing it as a death sentence, that it's a living death in a fashion. But even in harsh circumstances, people can find meaning in their lives, and they can grow, as evidenced by these 2 individuals who were ultimately executed. One went on to become a Christian pastor. And it's something I say often on my channel, is this is a temporal existence. This is our temporal home. If we approach this from being a Christian, I can't approach it from any other than a Christian viewpoint. And as I my last video, I talked about the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth in this temporal existence as it is in heaven, in our eternal existence. We are on a journey and we are going home. We are going to our eternal home. And at that point, we will stand before the judgment seat. And what's interesting is I mentioned the fact that Indonesia, I'm not sure the population, I think it's 200 plus million. It's the world's largest Muslim population country. And the Islamic faith does not hold Jesus to be God, nor do they hold Jesus to be the way and the life. They see Muslims see Jesus as a prophet, and they see Muhammad as the superior prophet. And what, Islam took Jesus was the Word made flesh, and Jesus's sacrifice on the cross, that was a blood atonement, so that you and I and everyone who accepts him into our heart as Lord and Savior can be reconciled to God, because we're broken, we're fallen, we're sinful, and we've all come up short. But the Islamic faith doesn't hold that. They hold that the way you attain entry into heaven or paradise is through works, that you have to justify yourself. And they absolutely 100% believe in capital punishment. It happens in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, another majority Muslim country, where there are public executions. And that was the way it was in the Old Testament. And Jesus came and he made a new covenant. And I can't imagine the pain and the anguish of the family members having to watch a brother, a son, being killed over what amounts to a mistake. And in terms of the death penalty, there's the notion of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth and a life for a life. And to a degree, if there's incontrovertible evidence that an individual is guilty, and I would almost go so far as to say that would have to include an admission of guilt. That would be one requirement for me to support the death penalty. And secondly, there have been cases in the United States where individuals have been sentenced to death. Good evening, Cryptomeria. Good to have you on here. There have been individuals in the United States where people have been convicted of capital murder and have been sentenced to death, but then and have accepted it. They have said, fair enough, go ahead. Lethal injection, firing squad, electric chair, whatever the method is, go ahead. And then groups like the ACLU, which is the American Civil Liberties Union, have stepped in and appealed their cases on their behalf without their wanting to be part of it. There have been individuals in the United States who've said, I cannot be rehabilitated. Send me to the judgment seat. And in that case, I could absolutely support the death penalty. The biggest problem I have with the death penalty is I couldn't pull the switch. And being unable to pull the switch myself, I cannot in good conscience ask the state to do that. I cannot ask the government or the state to do that which I would not do myself. So that's my take on the death penalty. So it's nuanced. I'm generally speaking opposed to the death penalty, but I am willing to put some water in my wine. I have Cryptomeria saying that they're watching live and they're sharing me on X, but lurking. So not watching, just probably I'm part of the background noise. Fair enough. there's another aspect to approach this with, and it's the whole notion of the drug trade. And in watching that video that Sharunian shared with me, the one that's linked below here on YouTube, I think it's an Australian show called Dateline. And it's kind of like a 60 minutes type expose, but it's a full hour long show on individuals with this Bali-9, not all of whom agreed to be part of the show. And apparently the Indonesian government was willing to let them come in and go into the prison and see. And, all they said is don't lie. Don't lie, come in, show the world. And from what I could see, it didn't seem like an inhumane existence that these, they're working on computers, teaching classes, engaging in worship, all kinds of, positive life affirming things. This is where Sharunian says a life sentence is a death sentence. I tend not to look at it quite that harshly, but that's one. We can look at the prison system, as it were, which is supposed to be geared toward rehabilitation, and certainly in the Western world, where the Western world is based on Judeo-Christian values, and Christian values are all about redemption, are all about forgiveness, grace. These are the central themes of the Christian faith, and yet many of us extending grace is difficult. We're told that when we invite Jesus into our heart, that he makes us a new creation, that we are made, we are born again is the term. We're born anew. We are a new creation. We are no longer that, throw away those garments that are stained with sin and be washed in the blood of the Lamb. It's a worship song that I enjoy. Have you been to Jesus for the saving blood? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? There's a fountain flowing for the soul unclean. Oh, be washed in the blood of the Lamb. And sorry, I shouldn't sing. But the thing is, Indonesia is not a Christian nation. It's predominantly Muslim. Although if you read the article down below, the Yahoo News link that I have, it's quite long. Apparently when this woman was released, as she left the prison, there were Hindu displays going on. So I imagine it's a multi-faith society, but as I understand it, it's predominantly Islamic. But leaving that aside, what about the drug trade? And why is it that the lowest members of the criminal activity of drug dealing, why is it the lowest members who pay the highest prices? How often do you hear about drug czars and the Pablo Escobars of the world and the individuals at the top? How often do you hear about these individuals being executed or even imprisoned? It's very rare. Daniel Copeman's here. Good morning, Daniel. From Mon Ami de Montréal. And to me, it's still evening. It's not morning until I go to bed and wake up. That's the morning, and I will be getting up early this morning. I am working. Thank you for the reactions, everyone. Thank you for the thumbs up. Now I got to remember where my train of thought was going. This is what happens. I get going in one direction, I read the comments, and then I lose my train of thought. Oh yeah, the drug trade, in terms of, it's always and it's true in so many aspects of life. It's always the smallest players who pay the highest prices. And that is absolutely 100% wrong. I read a book years ago called Freakonomics, and then Freakonomics 2. And the interesting thing about the drug trade is that, you don't need an advanced degree in economics. You don't need a master's level degree or a PhD in economics to understand supply and demand curves. And, the biggest issue with drugs is that there is demand. And when there's demand, there's going to be a supply. And all that harsh enforcement does is it crimps, it restricts the supply, which sends the price higher. And once the price goes higher, then you invite criminal activity. And so you wipe out the supply or restrict the supply, and then the price becomes prohibitively expensive and enticingly expensive for those engaged who are willing to engage in criminal activity. And if you're going to eliminate the issue of drug use, of drug abuse, it has to be dealt with at the source, which is at the user end. It's the users who are driving the demand. And then that in turn leads to other individuals who the money is just too hard to resist. Money, the love of money is the root of all evil. People love money. And so they're willing to take those risks. And there are individuals who can inoculate themselves from being persecuted and caught by hiring some stupid, dumb, idiotic young kids, teenage, barely young adults, to strap kilograms of heroin onto their persons and take it into a foreign country. And in Australia, there were a lot of individuals who, everyone probably knows Neil Young's old song, "I've seen the needle and the damage done." Heroin is a devastating drug. I'm lucky, and to the extent that I don't know of anyone. I'm not aware of anyone who's been a heroin user. Perhaps I am. Perhaps I do or have known heroin users, but I've never been aware of their use, and I've never used it myself. The highest I went up the drug chain was marijuana, Mary Jane, which is something I don't do anymore. I did in my university days, and later in my high school years, and for some years after. But I considered it fairly benign. I'm not a fan of drug use. I'm not a fan of artificial joy. I'd rather have the real thing. I'm going to read what Sharunian is reading. They were arrested on April 17, 2005. And I have difficulty with these names. And I think this played into it as well, unfortunately. Racism played into the condemnation that came from Australia. There were some Australians who had seen family members, people have been hurt by drug use. And so they were fully supportive of Indonesia executing these mules, these individuals transporting drugs. And part of that, and it plays out in that Dateline expose linked down below, is that they're Australian. You listen to them, they're all G'day, they're full on Aussies, but they're of varying different racial backgrounds. They're not all white. And that plays into it, unfortunately. And anyway, so Sharunian's writing, they were arrested on April 17, 2005. I'm going to say the name Mayuran Suku Maran, which that sounds like a Tamil name to me. And one of the gentlemen in the video does look like he could be Tamil. It's been 19 years. They probably served just as much time in prison than being free. Yeah, they spent half of their lives, pretty much, or maybe more, incarcerated. And if you watch that video, it speaks to the ability of people to find meaning in life in even the most harsh circumstances. And this is getting back to, Sharunian wrote a life sentence as a death sentence, and many would view it that way. But even in the darkest places, the human spirit and the power of God to reach into the most, you know, horrific circumstances, and to lift a person up and to give their life joy and meaning and purpose, it can be found. And I would prefer to see, you know, if it's a choice between life imprisonment and execution, life imprisonment, because they still have a life. They asked one of the kids, they said, you know, what are you hoping for? And, you know, ultimately he wanted to be released, but he'd still rather suffer, you know, be incarcerated for life, because he said it's still a life. And what I would say to that person is that you do have a life beyond this earthly existence, beyond this temporal plane. You are going home. And one of the individuals, I forget which one, did actually, I think, become an ordained Christian pastor in prison. And that's amazing, because Jesus sat with the sinners. That was one of the allegations. That was one of the points the religious leaders of Jesus's earthly time, that's one of the things they spoke out against him over. They said, you know, you sit down, you eat with tax collectors and sinners. Well, yeah, because they're the ones who need saving. I didn't come to save the righteous. I came to save the sinners. Make straight the way of the Lord. Get right. And you can't do it on your own. Anyway, I'm going to read on. Daniel writes, smoking a joint is no worse than a beer. I view them as pretty much the same, and I don't drink a lot. Last time I had a beer, Christmas time, you know, and I drink strictly socially now. Although I will admit, if I go to like an all-inclusive or something, my Scottish nature plays out. And, you know, I paid, you know, 2, 3, 4,000, whatever the amount is. I paid paid that money to go. And now booze is included. And so I almost feel obligated somewhat to overdo it. And I do. I have. I am far, this is where I talk about the fact that I am far from perfect. Whale oil beef wrote, I'm still waiting for Gordon to open that half-hidden gin bottle. Did I talk about my gin bottle? I have a bottle of gin. It's not half hidden. Here it is. London Dry Gin. The seal is still on the bottle. And there's dust on it. I don't drink. I bought this coming back either from an overseas trip or coming between Canada and the US. And it's my Scottish nature. I cannot resist a bargain. You know, $10 off. I got to buy one. So, and it's just been sitting there. That's the only bottle of booze I have in the house now. I think I have a little bit of a bottle of Crown Royal whiskey, rye whiskey, that a family member was over and drained, but I haven't touched it. Anyway, just going to catch up. And I agree, Daniel Copeman says that alcohol is worse. Actually, I do. Alcohol is worse than weed. I think the best form of weed is just to smoke it naturally. And it's interesting, you know, I wonder, I did some reading up on smoking, which is something I do. I smoke, and that's bad. But is tobacco in of itself the issue? Is nicotine the issue? Is that the reason, you know, is that the increase in cancer? Or is it all the other chemicals that they put into cigarettes and the actual paper that tobacco is wrapped in? Is that the issue? And I tend to believe that it's more to do with the actual, all the other crap that they put into the tobacco, the additives and the chemicals that they put in, which I believe were added to make them more addictive. Because nicotine in of itself, you can look this up. Harvard did a study and they gave rats or mice a choice between sugar, heroin, or nicotine. And they found sugar highly addictive, heroin highly addictive, but nicotine not to be addictive at all. That nicotine, just nicotine, is not addictive. And it's actually a naturally occurring element, or whatever, I don't know what you would exactly call it. Nicotine exists in tomatoes, it exists in green or peppers, and in other, maybe eggplant. Nicotine occurs naturally in other things other than tobacco. The highest concentration of nicotine is in tobacco, but it's also in tomatoes and green peppers. And during COVID, it famously came out that there was a smoker's paradox, that smokers got sick at a a significantly lower rate than they got sick less than non-smokers. Non-smokers got sick at a higher rate, and it led to speculation that nicotine might have had a prophylactic or preventative beneficial effect on this ACE2 receptor that the spike protein attaches to, and thereby enters your cell structure and makes you sick. That nicotine could be a good thing in of itself, but smoking, because of all the crap they put in the cigarettes, you got to look at the ingredients. But I'm digressing onto a different point. Sharunian writes, you can't blame drug dealers for drug users' habits. They were young men who wanted money and rich lifestyle. They did not hurt or harm anyone. It was not a violent offense. Drug use eventually, I mean, if you look at it from the perspective of a mother or father who's had a child who has overdosed on heroin and has died, and tell them that it's not hurtful or harmful, and they will vehemently disagree with you. And they will contend that if the drugs weren't out there, then my little Johnny, my little Janie, he or she would not have taken heroin. And that I view as being sadly naive, because if you restrict the drug supply, if you clamp down and you make it hard, you make it more difficult, all that does is raise the price. But it's still going to be there. The higher the price goes, the greater the incentive for criminals to get involved and to supply it. And so it's a vicious circle. And ultimately, my thought has always been, especially since reading those books, Freakonomics and Freakonomics 2, is that the only way to ever deal with the problem is to attack it at the source, and the source is the demand. If you eliminate the demand, then supply and demand. If there's no demand, there will be no supply. Beanie Babies, to use a benign example. No one wants them anymore, so there's no incentive to make them anymore. If no one's using heroin, there's no incentive to refine opium and turn it into smack. I'm gonna read up. Not Gordon's gin, no. Actually, the reason I got a bottle of gin is Ryan Reynolds bought into a company, became a part owner of a gin maker called Aviator Gin. And I saw a commercial, and Ryan Reynolds is hilarious. He's funny. And so I thought, I'll get some gin. At the time, but I've given all the bottles away. I had Cuban rum, I had vodka, I had scotch, and I had rye and gin. And that way I figure, and vodka. And if anyone wanted to drink, I had a liquor cabinet. But over the COVID era, what I did was I ended up just giving the bottles away to friends who, if someone helped me out with something, I'd go, here, have a bottle of rye, have a bottle of rum, have a bottle, and the only thing I have left is the gin. Daniel Copeman says, I can't even pronounce it. Tanqueray, good man. It's the only gin worth drinking. Add pineapple juice. maybe sometime I'll try it. I've never been a gin fan. My dad used to, on occasion, would have something called a lime Ricky, and you buy lime Ricky mix and you mix it with gin. Cryptomary writes Victoria Gin. It's a local distillery. Okay. Sharunian writes Angela Simpson would be a good candidate for death penalty debate. I even told her story of Bali-9. Now, Sharunian Allegiance is an interesting character. They've been in contact with an individual called Angela Simpson and shared with me a video on that individual. And we're talking about someone who is absolutely 100. If you do not believe in demonic possession, look up Angela Simpson on YouTube and you will witness it. If it's not demonic possession, I don't know what it is. But this individual committed heinous, violent, torturous murder on someone she believed to be in law enforcement and thought it was fully justified. And oh my God, if anyone, if the death penalty, is warranted, there's an individual. Cryptomary writes, I can't afford it. I stick to vodka. Like I say, the easiest thing is not to drink. I have not had, it's August now. And no, about a month and a bit ago, I went to a cottage with extended family, and there was some Heineken there, and I had a couple Heineken, but that's the extent of my drinking. And Cryptomary is writing, I live too far away, and nope, I can't believe it. It's a bad case. Well, I know you mentioned something in the last video about some issues. Drinking's a hard one. Everyone, it's escape in a lot of cases. And full disclosure, in my younger days, in my so-called salad days, when I was in my late teens, 20s, nearly right up until the age of 30, I was your classic weekend warrior. I would go out on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, and I have a bit of I would go overboard and get hammered, and I did it too much. And I guess you could say I got it out of my system. And I gave it up largely around the age of 30 when my first kids were born. Sharunian writes, surprisingly, Angela is actually nice. She definitely deserved a life sentence, even though she even thought Marunian and Andrew were handsome when I showed pictures of them to her. Yeah, I've never been to a prison myself, but maybe the church I go to has prison ministry, and maybe sometime I'll go up. There's a prison not too far from where I live. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Warkworth is the name of the prison. I think it's medium security. But I mean, if you want to check out that video, it's an interesting thing to watch because to me, I can take something positive out of it. And looking at these, in particular, these two young men who sadly were executed, but in their last days, in their last years, they were able to find meaning and purpose in life, even in a horrible circumstance. So no matter how bad our lives get, we can find meaning, we can find purpose, we can even find joy in miserable circumstances. And with the way this world is going, I didn't get into it too much in my last video, but I'll touch on it now. The fact that we could be heading to all-out war. I can't pronounce his name. Erdogan, the president of Turkey. It's spelled Erdogan. I wrote it down. I tried to write down. You hear them say it on the news, and they say it so fast, it's hard to tell exactly how they're pronouncing it. Erdogan. He has threatened to invade Israel. Then you have the killing of this guy, Hanaya, I forget it. I don't know how to pronounce his name either. He was considered the senior political leader of Hamas, and apparently was directly involved in the ceasefire negotiations that were being coordinated by Qatar and Egypt and the United States. And now he's been taken out, and Iran is threatening retaliation on their terms at a time of their choosing. And when the October 7th attack first occurred, if you look back at my videos right at the start, I was saying, at the time, I knew about Hamas and Hezbollah. I did not know about the Houthis in Yemen so much. I'd heard of them, but they weren't really on my radar. And what could happen? I mean, the way I saw things going is I know that these are proxy groups of Iran, and that Iran has a very close relationship with Russia. Russia is allied, has a no limits partnership with China. And then Russia is also in tight with the North Koreans, and they refer to this sometimes as the axis of resistance. And I could see, the world powers lining up, regional and world powers. Certainly China and Russia are world powers. Iran is a bit of a regional power, and lining up. And now we got Turkey getting involved too, and Israel being surrounded. And boy, howdy, look out, when that happens, because then everyone starts getting dance partners. It becomes a rinse and repeat of what happened after Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated with his wife in Sarajevo, I guess in 1914, what led to World War One. I've got Union writing, or rather, Whale Oil Beef writes, Albert Pike's letter to Mussolini in 1871 said World War III would begin with Iran. I'm not familiar with that, and I got to look into that because I know Albert Pike, if I'm not mistaken, is a very big in Masonic circles, and was Mussolini even in 1871? Mussolini, we're not talking Benito Mussolini, because Benito Mussolini was the dictator of Italy during the late 1930s, early 1940s, during World War II. He was in the alliance with Hitler, Nazi Germany, and fascist Italy. But I will look into that. Albert Pike's letter to Mussolini. I just find 1871, I find that date to be anomalous. It's an anachronism, if that's talking about Benito Mussolini. Sharunian writes, Mayunrin Sukumaran, I have trouble with the name, Wood wondered what would happen if he was white and blonde hair, blue eyes, or mega. Yeah. And that came out in that video that you shared down below. And I touched on it. I mean, these individuals, there was one individual who was white, and they talked about the fact that they're not Australian enough, because even though, G'day, and they're obviously from Australia, and I can't do that accent that great, but they don't look Australian too. And I have known Aussies before, and I have an impression of Australia. Maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, but the impression I have is that it tends towards being somewhat racist. Perhaps, like the southern U.S., almost parts of the southern U.S. Sharunian writes, I felt sorry for their parents. They had to endure trauma because of corrupt system. If you watch the video, the director, the warden, the head of the prison in which they were, actually was asked his own personal opinion, and he recommended clemency. He recommended actually either commuting their sentences to life imprisonment or to granting them full pardons, saying that they had been model prisoners and had been rehabilitated, which is the ultimate goal of the correctional system. But again, we're talking about a foreign country, Indonesia. And Cryptomeria, right? It's not one country. It's the larger Islamic Caliphate. That's it. You know, when we talk about Iran, that's their ultimate goal within the Islamic world. You have Iran, you have Egypt, you have Saudi, and there's so many different. The Iran is Shia, and they want a worldwide Shia system of Islamic governance. Countries like Saudi Arabia, though, are predominantly Sunni, and they have a system that they want, more of a Sunni system. And what you get is a battle over who gets to be the leader of the Islamic world. And that's where we get this term caliphate from. At least that's my understanding of it. Cryptomeria writes, I don't have white privilege in my neighborhood. Sucks to be poor. No. Don't know really what to say about that. Cryptomeria writes, my Italian friends were on the side of the Allies in World War II. During World War II, a lot of Americans, Canadians of German descent started changing their names, and Italian descent. They wanted to distance themselves from being associated with Canada's enemies. We know what we did with Japanese Canadians, even ones who were third, fourth generation Canadians, imprisoned them, took away everything they owned, threw them into jail, internment camps. Difficult times. War is not a good time, and we could be heading to war. And my video of yesterday talking about how the three parts of our brain, and how what makes us truly human is the frontal lobes of our brain. And when you're in a fearful state, and war certainly induces fear, is you go back into this limbic midbrain that is what we share with animals, and with mammals, with candy. And animals don't have a moral compass. Candy killed a rabbit in our backyard, and I don't think she tore it apart. There were no marks on it. I think she was playing with the darn thing, and I actually think it died of stress. But do you think Candy has any remorse over that? Has any moral sense that she did something wrong? Of course not. An animal. And this is the state that the beastly system of this world wants to drive us into. They want to drive us back into our limbic animal brain state, so that we don't think rationally, and we don't think like humans, that we think like animals, and then we get treated like animals. Okay. Whale Oil Beef has checked into it, and the letter is real, he's saying, but the letter was actually to Giuseppe Mazzini, not Mussolini, but Mazzini. So let me get my pencil, because the replay of the chat doesn't come up. Pike and Mazzini. I want to read that, because a lot of stuff, and I'm not saying this is fake, but I always have my radar is always up over things like that, because things can be faked and people can create things. There's a famous quote, and it goes, if you're 20 years old, or if you're young and you're not a liberal, then you have no heart. And if you're 40 or older and you're not a conservative, then you have no brain. That's a cute little saying, but it probably would have gone nowhere until people started attributing it to Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill famously said, and then people say, oh, this, and they started to repeat it because it was attached to a prominent famous person. But there's actually no record that Winston Churchill ever said it. Doesn't matter though. It's still kind of I kind of like it. I think there is some validity. I do think there is some truth to it. That, so many young people gravitate toward Marxism and this woke liberal ideology. And it's not because they're evil people. It's because they have a heart, and, they're very emotional, and it's just not fair. They have this notion that the world should be perfect. And once you get older, as you age and you start to realize and you start to gain some wisdom, you start to realize that, nothing is ever perfect. Perfect is impossible. And then you come up with this famous saying said by people far smarter than me, that the perfect is the enemy of the good, because you can never achieve perfection. So you're going to start attacking things which are actually good and positive and beneficial in order to try and achieve something that is ultimately impossible. Keep reading. Sharunian's writing at Cryptomeria. Originally, 6 people sentenced to death. 4 got commuted to life sentences. Meanwhile, Andrew and all their appeals were ultimately rejected in the case of the Bali-9. And there were 9. 2 were executed. 1 died in prison. I think it was kidney failure. And the remainder are under life sentences, with 1 having been granted clemency and has just within the last week or so, last few days, been returned to Australia, where apparently they're facing charges there as well, related to this drug mule activity. And good to see you too, Carrie Miller. Gosh, getting some names coming back that haven't chatted and haven't been on the live chat for a while. I'll leave Cryptomeria and Sharunian are having a little conference between the 2 of them. I'm going to leave it alone. That's all. That's you two. That's great. I'm going to wrap it up now. I do have to work in the morning. I'll be doing another live Saturday night. I'm going to take a pass tomorrow unless something mind-blowingly, I get a bug in my rear end and I have to talk about something. Otherwise, I'm just going to let it go, because there's just so much happening in the world right now. And I'll end it the way I always have been. And I will implore anyone commenting here, anyone watching at any time, no matter what, whether you believe in him or not, God believes in you. And so may the Lord our God, may the creator of all things, may the one who created you, may the Lord grant you peace. May the Lord make his face to shine upon. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you, and may the Lord grant you peace. See what happens when I go off script, when I go off my normal pattern of saying things, is you lose your train. It's getting late. I had a big day. I went swimming, hiking. I'm tired. Anyway, God bless, and we'll talk to you all in a couple nights. And